Hi everyone, my name is Zac Tao. I'm from Hong Kong MEP team, and our team was involved in this project in past 12 months. And Cundall was responsible for the MEP, the acoustic, security, and ITAV design of the project. And we handed over the project to client last month. And the grand opening happened 2 months ago, and then the overall process turned out to be quite smooth and successful. So in the next 14 minutes, I'm going to, probably the time is not sufficient for me to talk through the details, but I would like to share a bit of our experiences and also lessons learned from the project. Hopefully it can be useful. So a bit of the background, the project is located in Kowloon City, which is an old district in Hong Kong. And the project site is located in 2 podiums, which under 2 residential towers. And they are next to each other and are separated by a street. And there are two floors for each building. And one of the buildings is called Billionaire Royale, and then it's a permanently purchased property of Wollongong. So the space will be converted to teaching areas from the retail units of a shopping mall. And the shopping mall has been abandoned for over 5 years. So when we went there, the condition was really bad. And the other side was slightly better. And then it's Billionaire is actually the leased space, which will be used for temporary office and also library. And the condition was slightly better, especially the 2F, which was a relatively new kindergarten. And we were able to reuse some of the MEP system, including some VRV systems and also distribution boards to cut the cost. So we had lots of challenges throughout the process. I think the most challenging thing is the limited MEP space, because it was retail units, and the clear height from slab to slab of the existing condition is very limited to around 3.5 each meters. And the space will be converted to teaching area. So the architect has quite high requirements on the clear height of the lecture theaters and teaching areas, which is around 2.8 meters. So it could be very difficult for us to coordinate all the MEP spaces. So what we did is we carried out 3D imaging at the beginning during the site survey. And then with the help of the PM, we created this 3D imaging model, which allow us to access to all the 3D images anytime. And also the project was designed in full BIM environment with Revit. So we coordinated with the architect closely, and then we delivered by end of the tender stage a coordinated MEP architecture model, which really helped with the space coordination. The other thing is the pool existing site condition, which I mentioned, and especially when we had to reuse some of the existing equipment, which made things really difficult. So we had this very early engagement with the building management office and the contractor. And then we pushed the contractor to carry out lots of function tests of this reused equipment to reduce the risks later on. Another very challenging thing is the tight design program. So we only had 2 months to deliver from the SD stage to detailed design and also the tender documentations. So we had to plan ahead all the BIM setup, and also we utilize lots of functions like automatic calculation functions within Revit, including automatic circuiting, board schedule, LPD calculation, pipe sizing, which really helped us to fasten the process. So next, I'm going to give a quick run through of, give a little bit touch of each of the system, just give you some feeling of what we did. So for the mechanical system, because the building does not have any chilled water, so the solution was quite straightforward. We used the VRV system for both cooling and ventilation. The only issue we had was to identify the plant room location for the outdoor units, because at that time, the whole site was fully occupied either by the equipment in use or some abandoned equipment which hasn't been demolished. So we had to identify one by one on site to check which one can be taken out and which one has to be retained. The things was getting more complex in the Billionaire side because, as mentioned, we had to reuse some of the existing equipment. So we had to check all the labels and compare against the SBU drawings, and also back and forth to coordinate with the BMO. And luckily, we identified the sufficient equipment space for the mechanical system. In terms of the control, as mentioned, we have two sides. One is permanent, the other side is temporary. So we locate a central control station in the FM office in the teaching area, where the other side is linked to the central system via an internet network, because the two buildings is actually physically isolated by a street. Also, at the beginning, we had to agree control strategy with the client because this may affect their daily operation. So after a few rounds of discussion, we agreed to have only limited local control function for the teaching area, where for non-school hours and also for all the other areas, there's only central control to avoid efforts of operation. Also, we incorporated some COVID-19 preventive measures for the mechanical system, including the UV sterilizer and also MERV 13 filters for the ventilation system. And also we ensure the sufficient fresh air is pumped into space to reduce the risks. The acoustic is also a key concern of the teaching areas. So the client wants to have a minimized noisy impact from the MEP system. So we worked very closely with our acoustic team to apply these acoustic measures, including the acoustic lining for the ductworks, the silencers for the equipment, and also eventually we had a very big acoustic enclosure for one of the problematic fresh air fan. And also we allow low fan speed in the teaching area to minimize the noise from the fan. And also when we plan out all the equipment, we locate those noisy equipment like the fresh air booster fans and FAP units in the corridors, which is away from the teaching area. So the fire services is quite straightforward because we don't want to touch too much the FS submissions. So what we did is just to have simple tee-offs from the existing SBU system, and also have the new sprinkler heads for the fit-out scope. Where for the fire alarm, it's a little bit tricky because the original building was quite old-fashioned. So there's only one system within the building, including both tower, residential tower, and also our podium. So in case there's a fire alarm from the residential tower, that will trigger our alarm in our teaching area. So that's something the client doesn't want. So what we did is we added this additional AFA panel for the teaching area, and then we reconnect any fire alarm devices within the teaching area to the new panel. And this enabled the client to disable the fire alarm in case there's a false alarm from the residential tower. The plumbing and drainage system for the project is quite straightforward because we only have toilets, and that's the existing system. And then we had a bit pantries and then drinking fountains. We just simply tee off from the existing water supply and to the new fixtures. But we had some issues when we negotiate the ownership of the water meter with the BMO, because the toilets still belong to the landlord, while, however, the University of Wollongong is using that toilet purely, no other tenants. So we had the back and forth discussion with the building management office, and eventually we agreed that the Wollongong University pays the management fee covering this water bill, and then they will pay the WSD. So this is sometimes quite sensible in Hong Kong because WSD sometimes does not allow any third party to resell their water bill. And also we apply the COVID-19 mitigation measures for all the sanitary fittings. We use the wireless sensors whenever we can, and then including some door openers to the toilets. Electrical services is also quite straightforward. We basically had one feeder from the meter room to our tenant space per floor. And because the original use of the space was retail units, so the capacity is more than enough for the teaching area. And we try not to touch the ratings of the existing meters, because we want to avoid the complex application of the new meter. So in our case, we only had a very simple application to transfer the ownership of the meters. And also in terms of the distribution strategy, we try to avoid cross power distribution between floors, because that's allowing flexibility for the exit strategy for the client in case they want to exit some of the floors in different years. And the distribution, we cut the floor plate into 3 zones. This is also to try to reduce the amount of cables and reduce the cable tray size to save the space. And also power provision to the teaching area is also very important, because that's something also affecting the teaching. So we had to agree all the provisions with the architect and clients in day one. And we worked closely with the architect and the furniture supplier to integrate our power provisions for different function areas, for computer labs, and for some loose desk areas, we have to plan out the sockets along the wall to allow flexibility for their kind of interactive teaching. For the lighting control, we had different strategies for both buildings. For the permanent teaching side, we had this DALI system, which really saved our bacon later on. I myself had to stay on site to carry out this test for a few days, and then I realized this is really important for the users, because they had lots of requirements in terms of the presentation mode in the teaching area. Because we have the projectors in some of the rooms and an interactive whiteboard, which is kind of like larger version of iPad, as you can see in this picture, which had some reflections actually. So for the projector areas, I have to dim down the first few rows of lights down to 10% in order to create a clear image from the projector. Where for the interactive whiteboard area, the other way around, I have to dim down the last few rows of lights down to 20 or 10% to minimize the reflection to the audience in first few rows. So that really took us some efforts to resolve the issues and then make sure the client was happy with the system. And for the other side, the Billionaire, because it's a temporary office, so we try to achieve like cost-effective solution. So basically, we had these switching modules with occupancy controls and also daylight sensor controls, which is required by the code. So I think the client overall was happy with what they got. For a site like ours, which has been abandoned for 5 years, be very, very careful when you reuse the space. Even though we had been very, very careful, still things happened. For example, the water leakage from the roof or the drainage pipe blowed, and which damaged the bus bars, or the floor drain did not work. So this all delayed the program. So I would recommend make sure to push the contractor to do the function tests of any of the reused items to make sure they can perform well. And then lastly, anything related to the teaching, be very, very careful because later on there are different professors or teachers who will be using the space. So make sure you do the mock-ups or demonstration to them and make sure they are happy with what they got. I think that's it for me for today, given the time limitation.
Thanks very much, Zac. Really interesting talk. There's a question from Yasser Hafez in Edinburgh. Yes, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question.
So can you repeat the question?
Zac. Hi, Zac. I was wondering, the COVID-19 mitigation method that you talked about in the ventilation systems, is that like the new norm going forward, or is this just because the client wanted it, or have you done something like this on other projects?
So actually, In our original design, we already considered the MERV 13 filters, which we believe is quite effective, and also the sufficient fresh air rate, and also all the wireless technologies. But this UV sterilizer is something the client especially requested. And then we had a look and we noticed that the cost impact was not that much, so then we incorporated. But I think in general, in Hong Kong right now, because people were so concerning about COVID-19, and we are now looking at the measures in every project. And also, there's also something I did not mention in detail. For example, we had all those touchless technology for lighting control as well, using the occupancy sensor rather than the buttons. And also for the main entrances, we had that automatic door openers to avoid the touch of the door button or something.
Okay, cheers.
And also, we had like a thermal scan in the entrance to scan your temperature and stuff. So actually, that's something we did.
Okay, well, thank you very much.